So, are you tired of winning yet? Trump tacoed. Took him about a month, but he finally gave us a small, tiny little taco. Although this obviously does not mean that the war is over. I would now predict that Israel is gonna violate the ceasefire to keep the war going, but obviously that has already happened. I remember, I think I was sleeping when the ceasefire was announced, and when I woke up and found out about it, Israel had already violated it. So it was like 3 hours. 3 hours they managed to keep it. I mean, yeah, the motivation for Israel is pretty clear. They are all in. They want to keep the war going and destroy as much of Iran as possible, cause as much chaos as possible. This is why they won't really let Trump fully taco. I will come back to this later, but I think the real obstacle to fully ending this war is obviously Israel. Another question is, why did Iran even accept the ceasefire? After all, they now know that you can't negotiate with the United States and Israel. They know that the United States doesn't really follow any agreements. They know that the United States doesn't really follow any agreements. They know that Israel loves to assassinate negotiators. And they know that Israel pretty much violates any ceasefire or peace treaty that they have ever agreed to. So why did Iran even agree to the ceasefire? My guess is that they were probably pressured by their allies, and they needed to prove that they are still the reasonable side and they're still ready to end this war if their requests and demands are met. And they knew that it was going to go like this, but they just needed to prove to their allies that they are willing to make peace. And there's already some rumors behind the scenes that China was pushing them to do it. They just have to prove that they don't want to destroy the global economy. They're being forced to do so by the US and Israel. And yeah, where do we go from here? Like, what is going to happen next? Obviously, a lot of people suspect that the US is just trying to reconstitute its forces and then they're going to try again. That would be pretty stupid. Even stupider than starting the war in the first place, I guess. Considering how it has gone for them, and in the future it will probably be even worse. And if they try to do any boots on the ground, they're gonna lose a lot of people. But yeah, it's the sunk cost fallacy. I mean, Trump has completely torched his presidency. He has lost most of his supporters. Basically, the only ones who are left are boomers who have no idea what's going on. And a bunch of new people, Zionists, came along and, well, they support Trump until he has outlived his usefulness. So yeah, we seem to be in a scenario where this war will go on until Israel is stopped. And that could be a lot sooner than people might expect, because as of now, Hormuz is functionally still closed. There's only a limited number of ships passing through every day, with the explicit approval of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So most of the world is not getting their oil. And you have to remember that it takes these ships a couple of weeks to traverse the ocean. So a lot of oil shipments are still arriving from the days before the Hormuz was closed. But now the point is drawing near where there will be no more ships arriving that went to the Strait of Hormuz, and then we are really going to feel the effects. We haven't even felt them that strongly until now. But I think once the real effects of the Hormuz closure hit, it will be very painful for the West, maybe even unbearable. And a lot of people will probably be calling for a quick end to the war that is effectively a surrender. But now I want to talk about MAGA and the wider conservative/Republican population of the United States. Obviously, we're seeing biblical amounts of cope. People claiming that Trump actually won this and it was all like 5D underwater backgammon or whatever. I think a lot of people are just very uninformed, and some of them are basically paid cheerleaders. Like, they get funding to spew this BS. Effectively, one of the talking points, this I find very interesting, is now that somehow Europe is to blame for this whole disaster. Obviously, Trump is blaming them for not joining him in the war, which is, on its face, just patently ridiculous. Europeans don't have huge militaries for power projection for the obvious reason that they are US vassals, and the US doesn't want their vassals to be strong enough to compete or threaten them. So somehow a lot of Americans including Trump, don't seem to understand this when they complain about NATO not paying their fair share for defense. That was quite literally the point of NATO, to keep Europe weak and dependent and controlled by the United States. So Trump calling for NATO to rearm is actually a bit counterproductive. And with everything else that he's doing, it's pretty obvious now that Trump will be remembered as the American president who ended the American global empire, or at least set it on a permanent path of decline. But yeah, that seems to be the narrative for a lot of conservatives and Republicans, that actually Europe has been ripping off the United States for decades and decades, and that Europe is holding them back and they need to separate from Europe. If you just think about it for 5 minutes, the United States basically conquered Western Europe during World War II. Why would you force a deal on someone you conquered that is beneficial to them and detrimental to you? So either this narrative makes zero sense, or the quote-unquote greatest generation that won World War II for the United States was just not very smart. A little hint, number one is true, the story makes no sense. But yeah, as it stands now, there is a lot of anti-European sentiment in the United States, and I think it is also actively being pushed by Zionists, because on the one hand, it allows them to shift the blame away from themselves and to somehow transfer it to Europe, which had zero to do with this failed operation. And on the other hand, if the United States removes forces and decouples from Europe, then all that energy and all these resources can be used to, of course, serve Israel. And Israel seems to want to suck the United States dry until there's nothing left, pretty much. If you look at it from the European perspective, this seems to be actually a very good development, because Europe, which has been under US occupation more or less for a couple decades, is now slowly starting to regain its independence. I mean, obviously there was the whole Ukraine war that was basically started by the CIA doing a color revolution. And then, of course, there was Nord Stream, which was blown up in a joint venture between the US and Ukraine. Then, of course, Trump, the master negotiator that he is, pretty much managed to offend all of the European elites with his weird attempt to take over Greenland. And now the Iran war, which hurts pretty much everyone around the world, including Europe, seems to have finally driven home the point to the EU elites that the US is not your friend anymore. So yeah, European leaders, I think Pedro Sanchez is leading the charge actually, are trying to reassert the authority, and they're starting to realize that the US is no longer their ally. Another factor is, obviously, as the United States becomes less and less European, the hostility towards Europe also goes up. Because a lot of non-white Americans basically see Europeans or white people in general as colonizers. Even if that narrative doesn't make too much sense, because all the colonizers are basically in the colonies. The Europeans who remain in Europe are basically the descendants of peasants who never really colonized anything. Not that I would advocate that European Americans should be punished for something that their ancestors did at some point. So yeah, right now it seems like the United States wants to withdraw from Europe, and really with that they kind of would be shooting themselves in the foot. Because if you look at, well, just a map of the world, Eurasia is a giant landmass with a lot of resources, much bigger than the Americas. And the quote-unquote West has basically been a cudgel into Eurasia that prevented the continent from really working together. Because you had at first the Iron Curtain, which basically didn't allow much cooperation between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And of course now the US destroyed the relation between Russia and the rest of Europe and is trying to destroy the relation between Europe and China. But if that does not succeed and Eurasia was to unite in an economic sense, it would basically be unstoppable. Think of Halford Mackinder's Heartland Rimland thesis. He who rules the heartland rules the world. Not that I think that all of Eurasia will be under one state with central control, But even if Eurasia has one giant economic zone, it will be unstoppable. So this is actually in the interest of Europe and pretty much everyone else in Eurasia to kick the Americans out and work together on their giant continent. Obviously, it won't be easy. Many wounds will have to be healed, many relationships will have to be rebuilt. But truly, it's in the long term interest of Europe to do so. And as it stands right now, it looks like the path towards that might be open. And yeah, the US will basically shrink down its zone of influence over merely the Western Hemisphere, merely the American continent. So that's one way the eventual end of the Iran war could turn out. But of course, for that to happen, Israel will need to be stopped before it escalates this war into a true catastrophic global conflict, into a true World War III. So yes, we live in exciting times. We are watching history happen every day in front of our eyes. That's it. Talk to you some other time. Bye.